Shalom, everybody. Today we're going to talk about virginity as it pertains to a physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual sense. That we're going to encompass a whole lot of different things, of the things that pollute ourselves, not only our bodies, but our minds in terms of sexuality. And we're going to talk about basically coming back to completeness, soundness, wholeness, tamim, gamir, all these different things to come back, and that in order to reach that level of that divinity within us, we have to first embrace that virginity within ourselves, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. So let's get started with our little conversation. And I apologize to everybody. There will be pieces of this that are uncomfortable and that are for adults, but this topic of this divine union and virginity is also something that is for adults and not for children. When we get into the topic of virginity, we're going to use some Bible references, and we're going to use some Aramaic words, some Hebrew words, some Syriac versions, which is actually just Aramaic with written differently. And we're going to use some Greek words and bring it all into English and try to wrap it all together into something to talk about these important topics as they would be concerned biblically, as many people would say, or even cosmically would be almost a better way to put it, that follows the natural laws of God in the way that it operates. So let's keep moving on, and let's get to our next slides. The first and most important piece to bring up is that no matter who you are, where you are absolutely 100% loved. And when we talk about how much you are loved unconditionally, completely, wholly, tamim, gamir, all of the way across cosmically. It's in God's eyes, you are loved unconditionally. And it doesn't matter what has happened, it doesn't change the way that the Creator feels about you. And I thought nothing could be more appropriate than to start off with B'Shem Yeshua Anachnu Mitpalim, or in Jesus' name we pray. And this is a presentation that's kind of is brought to you by my ministries called Phoenix Ministries, which is Through Christ We Rise on IAM137.com. 137 is a different topic for an entirely different day, but it basically means operating at the natural laws of God, or the alpha particle, or the fine structure constant of the universe that our reality is built on, that all of physics and mathematics and geometry follows these laws, and they're biblically described in many different ways. So my ministries, of anything that I do through my ministries, or any profits or anything else that I do, is all just given away to charity, to feeding children around the world and building orphanages or paying for somebody's medical bills that needs to be. So this entire presentation is, I'm just kind of a middleman for this through my ministries, and God just kind of delivers the different things to me that says, he's like, hey, I need you to deliver a message for me. And I say, I'm happy to be a messenger. So now we can move on, and let's actually get into the information now that we got this started. To start us off, we're going to talk about a Bible verse that is Matthew 5:48, which is known as the Sermon on the Mount. And it basically says, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which in heaven is perfect. Now, if we were to take just the standard English translation of this, it doesn't mean nearly what we think nearly what it should actually mean. What we think it means is not even close. And so we're gonna basically digest and break apart one of the words that, let's approach it in the next slide, and let's take a look at them. The two of my favorite words to use, because these are much more advanced languages than the Greek or the English languages are, because they have so much deeper symbolism carved into it. And there's a book that I put out recently called The Aleph that'll break down just one letter and how much that actually means when it comes to both Aramaic and Hebrew. But there's a reason that these languages were used, because they're so much more advanced. And the same words that basically mean the same thing in the two different languages are the Hebrew word tamim and the Aramaic or Syriac word, which is gamir. And let's take a look at the actual definitions on the next slide here. The translation and the expansion on the word perfect, or the gamir, or the tamim. Uh, they mean something completely different than what we would think would just mean standard perfection. And when we actually get into the Bible verse, it actually uses that word tamim and gamir twice, where it says, be the perfection as your Father in heaven is perfect, or perfection itself. But it also means brought to the end, finished, wanting nothing necessary to complete oneself. It's full completeness, perfection. And number 5 is one of the big ones, that which is perfect, to consummate human integrity and virtue. And then of men, full grown adult, full age, mature, which is definitely, there's conversation if we're having it as for a full grown adult. But the consummate human integrity and virtue is to basically intercourse with the Creator and become all of that which is perfect. And so our next slide will get into it a little bit more of how each of us in our humanity, we are already complete and whole and sound, and we already are the perfection as our Father in heaven is perfect. And I don't like using the word Father in heaven being perfect, because Father is a very patriarchal thing which disregards the feminine aspect of everything that we're trying to deal with, because the feminine and the masculine aspect are the two sides to the coin. And we'll approach this in the next slide as we get to it, but it's more important to talk about when we say perfect and perfection, we don't just mean in a physical human sense, like our physical bodies. We're talking about the perfection that is expressed throughout creation, that it's all of the foundation of our entire reality is built on, of this completeness and this, what it means to actually integrate the perfection to be as our Father in heaven is perfect. That means to consummate that human integrity and virtue of the full grounding of the divine soul within all of us into our physical bodies and into our thoughts, to clean ourselves completely and perfectly away from anything that might soil or tarnish our souls, our bodies, our minds, or our emotions. But let's go and let's take a little talk about this perfection being displayed in 2 different halves or mirrors, according to a biblical verse from Genesis. And so the verse comes from Genesis 2:21, where we talk about where Adam went from whole to not whole, if you will, when he went from tamim to not tamim, from gamir to not gamir. And so the verse, Genesis 2:21, says, and the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. It's worth noting that the Hebrew Aramaic word for ribs does not mean just rib, but it means more a side or a half. So a side, a rib or a beam, a rib of a man, a rib of a hill or a ridge, etc. The side chambers or cells of temple structures. Remember, our body is a temple. So the side chambers of our cells, a rib, a plank, a board, a cedar, a fir, leaves of a door, or a side of an ark. So the one word meaning side or rib, it's commonly translated in English just as rib, but it means so much more than an actual rib. If we were to look like an actual rib inside of a body, that is a very poor translation when we say God took a side or a half of Adam and took it out of him to create something so he could take the inner and make it represented externally. So the inner became the outer, the piece that we wouldn't see inside ourselves, we were able to see outside of ourselves, so we could see that other half reflected within us. And so in Genesis 2:22, it's called the Ezer Kenegdo, which means helper, teacher, meaning Adam's other half that was brought out and made was meant to be a helper and a teacher, not a subjugate, to say God made woman for Adam because he needed, it wasn't good for him to be alone. It was like, no, because we needed this helper teacher, that feminine aspect, to bring that which was inside of us, the subconscious, and make it conscious outside of us. And our whole journey, this whole thing about the virginity and the path of divine union, is coming up to that Bisari Chad, or the one flesh, where we're able to take and realize that feminine aspect within all of us and integrate it with the masculine aspect that's within all of us as well. But we live in a 3-dimensional reality that operates in terms of polarity. So we have to have the polarity in order to exist in our 3D realm. And when we remove that polarity, we move back to the perfection and back to the source and back to our Father in heaven who is perfect. And so it's that resolution of polarity, but it cannot happen unless we ourselves become perfect. So let's take a look at this next little slide here quick before I elaborate any further. So at the point of incarnation, basically, when God made Adam, he wasn't able, or when God made Adam, he wasn't fully able to actualize and understand all of the internal parts of himself. He had his 3D physical body and everything that was around him, but it's, as above, so below, as within, so without. Adam needed an Azer Kenegdo, or a teacher helper, to help him realize the subconscious parts of himself, or the feminine half, or the magnetic to his electric. So when God came and he took this side out of Adam, he's no longer or complete as spoken in the Hebrew languages, because in order to exist in a 3D physical reality, we must have polarity. And that's what makes the magic so great, is when a man and woman come together, and when they do it with the divinity at the center of all of it, then when they come back to that completeness and God has evolved in the equation, those of you who understand to really truly entangle with your partner of Adam with the Azer Kenegdo, you understand how magical it is when we start to bring these two halves together, and the magic of creation that happens in between. But let's go ahead and talk about this next little bit, and let's get into this polarity a little bit and what it actually means. And so what we're going to kind of talk about on this whole thing is this kind of coming back to wholeness, to perfectness, to the perfection, to integrating both pieces of ourselves to where there is no other, there is no this or that, there is no up and down, there is no left and right, there is no man and woman. There's only that Basar Echad, that one flesh of the two coming together, that when we resolve the polarities of the magic, when we return to that center point of that center of the universe, that stillness, the perfection, the vector equilibrium of which our entire reality is constructed upon, collapses, and we go back to the very source and essence. So we're one more slide. We're gonna move to the next one. We're gonna talk about this polarity that is necessary to basically maintain a 3D physical body and incarnation in this lifetime, in this reality, in this planet that we have here. So the Chinese would call it the yin and the yang. The ylang-ylang flower is one of the best ones that displays this property of both masculine and feminine. But basically we live in a world of opposites because we have to. We have to live in a world, in order to have a 3D physical body, we have to live in a this versus that. Up versus down, forward versus backward, left versus right, hot versus cold, light versus dark, calm versus energetic, slow versus fast, tired versus lively, front side, back side, open spaces, closed spaces, mental, physical, even numbers, odd numbers, intuition, logic, storage and usage, quiet, loud, receptive and giving, death and life, higher pitches and lower pitches, the sun, the moon, the day, the night, the light and the dark, black and white, positive charge, negative charge, electric and magnetic in terms of physics. So this is the only way we can exist on this planet, is to live and have this polarity to where I have me and my physical body that is not the outside of me, and the things that are not me. So it's the only way to have a physical body, so that I can move things and then put them in a direction. If I lift something up, I'm moving it up versus down. We have to have this, not so much judgment, but distinguishment from this versus that. And that's part of this whole ego that we wrestle with, is the this versus that. And that's where this divine union, this Basar Echad comes in, of the one flesh, of this resolution of these opposites. Because as we all know, when a man and woman come together and they resolve the polarities, it's magical. And that's the point of it. And the more that we can clean up our consciousness and move back to the perfection, the Hatamim, the closer we can come to that, the more magical experience we can have when we resolve these polarities and these opposites and return to the source while still experiencing it as a human being at the same time. So now that we kind of set out here of the polarities, let's move on to the next slide and let's talk a little bit more here. In order to experience what we call the Basar Echad, or the one flesh, the man shall leave his, man and woman shall leave their father and mother and come together and they shall be one flesh. That's the basari chad, or the one flesh. But the thing is, in order to actually be this tamim, this gemir, this telios is also called in, I think it's telios in Greek. The only way to have this come together, like if you want to experience the perfection, each opposite, each polarity must be perfect. So this wholeness and this completeness that we talk about also requires that each side becomes the perfection as well, from both sides of the mirror. So the thing is, you don't want to robe yourself in someone else's dishonor. You want to really choose who you're going to be with. We're going to get into this more later. But in order to have this perfect resolution of opposites, to experience this magic of the Basari Chad, both sides of the equation must be balanced and perfect as well in order to become the one equation instead of the two. It's also important to know, we're going to bring this back up later, the love you make dictates the child you create. And so we're going to talk about some stuff and what that actually means when we get to this. One of the first things that I need people to be aware of and basically wrap their heads around is a phenomenon known as quantum entanglement. It's a physical phenomenon that occurs when a pair or group of particles are generated, interact, or share the same spatial proximity in such a way that the quantum state of each particle of the pair or group cannot be described independently of the state of the others, even when the particles are separated by long distance. Those of you who have brought online any of your psychic capacities and understand that when the man and woman get married and become together, your thoughts become their thoughts, your cravings become their cravings. You know when the other person is happy, you know when they're sad. You can talk to each other without saying a word. You can feel everything the other person feels. This is quantum entanglement. And how does quantum entanglement happen? Contract and agreement. If you enter into a contract with somebody, be it your citizenship or your nation that you're in, or if you enter into a business agreement, you are now quantumly entangled through contract. The other way too is the sexual entanglement. When the first in Genesis 1, when they talk about and the earth was without form and void, and God hovered. The word is merahephet. When God hovered, what it really means is caressed or entangled with the surface of the deep or the void. The deep and the void means unreality. And so what God did was he quantumly entangled with it. And this is what happens when two people share a bed and are intimate together. They become quantumly entangled. Quantum entanglement enables particles to affect other particles instantaneously across any distance. So entangled particles would remain connected even if they were on opposite sides of the universe. During intercourse, when two people become, two people become completely entangled with one another. Your thoughts are their thoughts. Your addictions are their addictions, and vice versa. One flesh, basar ihad, quantum entanglement. You take a picture of the little brains there and the two thoughts coming together is the one. This is the point of this journey to the perfection between each of us. It's why Adam had an Azer Kenegdo, that everything that was right with him was highlighted in his other half, and everything that was wrong with him is highlighted in the other half. So the perfections are magnified by the Azer Kenegdo, or the teacher helper, and the imperfections are magnified and highlighted and brought to the surface in your Azer Kenegdo. Think of it, the people that you love the most are the ones that you blow up at the hardest when something goes wrong. You usually take all of the problems that end up happening, you end up taking it out on your spouse or significant other, don't you? You don't take it out on random strangers. It's the people you hurt, those you love the most, because that is the teacher helper, the Azer Kenegdo, the other half of the mirror. That's what it means from the Adam and the Chava, or the Eve. That's that Azer Kenegdo of the teacher helper. And that's what it's here to be. So this quantum entanglement, when you get into bed with somebody, you are quantumly entangled, that every single particle in your body is entangling and connected to this other person, that even if I move them 50 light years away, you are still connected instantaneously. Of whatever happens to the one person happens to the other person. And as you become more conscious and more aware, you start to feel everything your partner and your spouse feels. You start to experience everything that your partner does in the way that they experience it. And now for men, this is going to be probably the most uncomfortable aspect to experience when, for lack of a better way to put it, experience what it's like to have somebody else inside you in a way versus being inside of somebody else. And this is part of this development of expanding yourself and the resolution of polarities to where you experience the act of intimacy, where you feel everything that your partner does. So men, you feel everything that your feminine counterpart feels. You feel yourself inside of your feminine counterpart and what it's like to experience the gift of intimacy and intercourse as your actual other half from the woman's perspective. And women, you will feel it from the man's perspective. And that's what this quantum entanglement and this basari had, this one flesh of being able to return to the perfection, will entail. That the beauty of this, though, is that as we perfect ourselves and we evolve ourselves, we become able to experience intimacy at a level at which we've never been able to comprehend until we start to really, truly bring about this resolution of opposites, to where you feel every single thing the other person does, and every thought, every sensation, every emotion, every breath, everything is experienced from the opposite side of the mirror. And that's what the whole verse that Jesus was talking about, of be therefore the perfection as your Father in heaven is perfect. God is already both of these, and in our 3D incarnation, when we accepted and incarnated into polarities, we lost what it's like to have to that other half of what it feels like. And that's where this magic and this gift of this intimacy and this basari had comes. That's where this comes into play, and that's what it's for, to return back to the divine union and return to the source while experiencing everything that God was of the perfection and the perfection of heaven, experiencing that in your physical body as a human being, and the universe expressing itself through your physical body of the glory of God's creation. Now this is where the presentation takes a little bit of a turn. This is the darker half, but there is no light without the dark. So we have to always look at the darker half of things and shine the light on it and bring it to light so that we can transmute it. And so we have to have light and dark, but the key thing here is to remember, be mindful of who and what you allow into your soul. The sexuality is sacred. This is why they call it the sacral chakra. The sacral chakra is basically the sexual reproductive organs of this. It's called sacral because it's sacred. You don't want to let anything other than God's perfection into that thought process, into that entire energetic area. And so we're going to talk about a couple of these things of why we're even getting into this and why it is so important, thanks to the Babylon that's around us, of the perversions of God's beauty, of what it means, and why you need to be so mindful of who and what you allow into your soul. Essentially, we're going to talk about sexually transmitted demons. Now, don't get too hung up on the word demon here, please. I'm trying to simplify this for us. Condoms might stop STDs, but they can't stop STDs. So they can stop sexually transmitted diseases, but they do not stop a spiritually transmitted disease. So when I go back to spiritually transmitted demons or sexually transmitted demons, demons simply refers to a rogue mental program that a person doesn't have control over, that takes on a life of its own. These programs or demons are software that installs itself into your consciousness, that is a self-running program that loves to spread itself. The thing in these software programs, it's like installing software onto your computer. You can get malware on your computer. Same thing in your mind. You have basic hardware of your biological systems, your brains, your neurons that fire and neurotransmitters and different organs through the body and different regions of the brain that do different things, and then different regions of the body that do different things. Well, all of that hardware is run by software, which is mental programming of what you think sexuality and intimacy is, who you've been with, what you've seen perhaps on television or something, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. But basically, this demon is it's a software program that gets installed, and it can be something of you grew up with thinking sex was shameful. This is a program running in your head. When we get into trauma, trauma is now a program that runs in your head, and we can call these demons because you don't have control over them. They take on a life of their own and they run themselves. That's what I mean by a demon. I don't really mean like a physical little boogeyman running around with a pitchfork or whatever else. But that does not mean, however, that these things are not real. When those of you who have opened up your psychic abilities and these other gifts and the third eye, or the pineal as Jacob called it, you're able to see through a different light that these things, you can see these programs, that they will take on a shape or a form that represents the program that is running. Just like your soul is housed in a body, these demons, if you will have a physical shape to them based upon the program and the software that's been installed wherever it is. And they don't even need physical contact to spread themselves, because thoughts, you don't need physical contact to send a thought to something else. Like a telephone, I could call somebody up and spew hatred at them. Hatred could be considered a demon or a road mental program, or I'm just really pissed and I'm taking it out on anybody. So these things can spread in all these different ways, that this software is malicious, that it's like malware on your computer. It can't wait to install itself on another piece of hardware walking around. And the important part to remember is these soul ties of you become the sum of every person you have ever been with sexually, as well as the sum of every person they have ever been with. So while casual sex might sound fun, in the course of it, you basically lose pieces of yourself in the other people, and the other people leave the pieces of themselves in you. So the more partners that you have, you are entering into soul ties with every single one of them anytime that you are intimate on any level, which is kind of why it says, hey, listen, watch your thoughts. If your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If you see something, if you see somebody that looks great and you start having impure thoughts about it, you have entered into a quantum entanglement soul tie with this person. Then that person now lives inside your head. And that's an offense not only to yourself, but to the other person who didn't give you permission to do that. Now, it doesn't matter what they dressed like, what they were walking around doing or wearing, whatever else. You didn't have permission. It is your own fault to control your reactions and what kind of soul ties that you enter into. Now, see, the human consciousness is so exceedingly powerful. Quantum entanglement does not need to be in person. We're going to get into a very, very unfortunate topic that is a very dark one that we do need to deal with and we do need to address, because it is a rampant problem in America that displays itself in many, many levels. But quantum entanglement can happen literally just by thinking of something else. Whenever you start to think of something, you start to merechefet, you start to quantumly entangle with whatever it is you're thinking about. Take a break just for a second. Pause here. Everything that I've talked about in this, just put it on hold for a second. Stop. And think of your significant other or your spouse, the memories, what they feel like, what they smell like. You are quantumly entangling with that person. And so you need to watch your thoughts of who and what you are entangling with, because you don't have to be in person for this entanglement to be happening. I chose this image because it's a perfect image to display and moving us into our next topic of how this quantum entanglement, you don't need to be in person in order to quantumly entangle with someone or something. And here's where I'm leading to. I'm leading to one of the greatest super weapons against humanity's consciousness: pornography. Remember I said you don't have to be in person to quantumly entangle with someone? If you are watching two people being intimate on a TV screen, a computer screen, whatever it is, you are quantumly entangling with them. If you start to engage in self-pleasuring behavior while there's other people on the screen doing the same thing, you are quantumly entangling with that person. And this pornography is the greatest super weapon ever used against humanity's consciousness, because pornography was not invented to display beautiful acts of human intimacy. Pornography, especially what it is today, because I unfortunately have been places and seen pieces of it in the past, and I absolutely despise this stuff, but listen, this is a reality and this is why I'm here to approach this. Pornography was invented to be the exact opposite of human intimacy. It was invented to be the most degrading, emotionless, completely devoid of intimacy, barbaric act that you can possibly imagine. And that's why every time if you go into it, and I did research on this, so because not that I liked it, but fortunately put on the armor of God, whatever you want to call it, but the most horrific, barbaric, and the more offensive and against God's natural law of intimacy, that the more against it can be, the higher it will rate up in the pornography, to where it will be young chicks being abused while they're passed out, or there is something like it's rape scenes are made popular by these pornographer videos, or two guys, one girl, or if you've ever watched any pornography of any kind, there is no physical intimacy, there is no kissing, there's no hugging, there's no emotion. It's just how much the hands, you see the hands of a man are always like behind his back or somewhere else, so that you can just get a good shot because you don't want the hands in the way. So it becomes this, it removes everything human about the equation and degrades it to this barbaric, animalistic, just ritual going through the motions that you've got, God is no part of this anymore. You are worse than animals at this point. And the thing is, these videos, and I've heard this horror stories on Pornhub of women who are drugged and then recorded and gone through all of this stuff, and they get the highest rated views because this program, this super weapon, deliberately puts the most barbaric and horrific videos at the top of your feed to get the most views, because these software programs take over and want to spread themselves. And so the more demonic and more horrific that they are, the more that they hijack consciousness. These software programs hijack your hardware, and you can see this in a grand scale of how they take these horrific videos, find themselves to the top of the viewing list, and are at the top of the sponsored list, because the most horrific and powerful quote-unquote demons and malicious software programs find the ways to install themselves as rapidly as possible in as many people as possible. So like I said, these are programs that take on a life of their own. They hijack your hardware by installing these software programs. So we're not done here. Let's keep going. The other thing that happens too with this pornography is a super weapon. You're quantumly, like if you're engaging in porn and pleasuring yourself to it, you are now making this computer screen or a phone screen or a TV screen is now part of the equation. And so it starts to rewrite the programs in your head that when it comes time to quitting or stopping or actual physical human intimacy, people with porn addictions many times can't get aroused anymore by a physical person. They need the porn on in the background, or they need a computer screen in order to get themselves to where they can even achieve an erection or arousal. And so this is part of the deadliest part of this quantum entanglement deal, is that when you're involving another electronic piece of equipment into the equation, eventually you can't operate that whole program without that piece of electronic or anything being part of the equation. You've removed a piece of the equation by removing the screen or the laptop or the TV or the phone or whatever else it is. When you remove that piece of the equation, now the software has no idea how to run anymore, because you've taken out a piece of the equation, because it has built itself into it. Like I said, demonic, if you will. I hate using that term because it sounds so like surreal, and it drums up images of some like psychopath or whatever screaming about the demons and whatever else. But like, that's not what I'm trying to say. These software programs are programs that run in your head, and these rogue ones we're just going to lump into the term of demon. That when you remove this part of the equation that it requires, you don't get to operate, like your sexuality can't operate anymore, because you've removed it now what you've made an essential piece of the equation. We're not done yet. Let's keep going. Let's keep the horror moving. And so let's talk about this, of why sexual educators don't emphasize that casual sex with multiple partners is not only a health hazard, it is a spiritual hazard. When you have sex with someone, you're having sex with every single person they've had sex with, and 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 they've had, and so on, and so on, and so on. This is the important part of it too. We've already gone over the quantum entanglement and all these other things, but this is one of the most important parts, that at the point of climax, the subconscious fully opens up and the other person is given free access to the deepest parts of your subconscious that you don't have conscious access to without exceptional levels of training. Also, any other software that has installed itself in the other person, the 99% of the time they're not even aware of, that software also now gets full access to the deepest parts of your subconscious in which to install itself. So these boogeymen jump ship. And at the point of climax, this subconscious opens fully that you give the keys to the kingdom to this other person and any other software programs that are running inside of them. And here is the point I really wanted to get to. In the case of pornography, climaxing or orgasming while watching pornography means that you have been with every single person these people on the screen have been with, whether these people have been with them in person or whether a whole bunch of people have pleasured themselves to a screen and opened their subconscious to being with them. So there's not only the number of people that these people have physically been with, there's the number of people who have watched the video that they have now spiritually been with. So when you take a pornography thing that has got 100,000 views, which that's actually a very low number when it comes to some of these Pornhubs and other stuff, you are now looking at 100,000 people, and every other video that they have watched entangles with you as well. So these software programs, literally hundreds of thousands of them cumulatively, now get free access to your subconscious in which to install themselves in your spirit, your soul, your mind, your emotions, and your body physically. Unfortunately, too, we have to talk about root problems, and there's going to be a lot of people that are pissed off at me about this, and too bad, sorry. Also, number one, if you are a regret parent and you didn't know, please, please, please do not hold any of this next series part against you or against yourself if you didn't know, because there is an entire agenda set up to ensure that you don't know about this and nobody talks about it. But one of the other things we have to talk about is this trauma. We've talked about these programs that install themselves, these rogue programs. Unfortunately, when we talk about this pornography addiction and the fact that 1 in 3 women sexually abused, a huge contributor of this is not only the pornography, but the root cause of why this is even there. A very root cause of it is circumcision. Why? Because circumcision traumatizes the infant boy like crazy. It is known as an MK Ultra pain pleasure reversal symmetry switch for trauma-based mind control. You heard all of this right. Bear with me. Basically, we have now flipped the switches in a little boy's brain that says pain is pleasure and pleasure is pain. Look at the self-destruction that so many men are hardwired to. The more they can drink, the more they can smoke, and the more dumb crap they can do to them and hurt themselves. Suddenly, that means they love themselves and they're cooler. And it's embraced by society, but one of the biggest things, and I want to say it was Sweden, they did a study where there's circumcised men and not circumcised. And this was part of the FBI did this research, and they found that 95% of all rapes that happened in Sweden were committed by men who were circumcised, even though circumcised men represent 3% of the population. Why? Because this trauma hardwires men for abuse, and the reasoning and compassion and emotional capacity is sabotaged. And because mirrors, the Zer Kenegdo, we talk about the Tamim and the Gamir. What is wrong in the masculine will be reflected in the feminine. We talked about polarization, opposite halves. Anything that is wrong in one, broken in one side of the mirror or the other will be reflected upon the other. So the trauma and the damage that has happened to men gets reflected into the women in the result of the number of women who have been sexually abused. Also, the pornography will compound this trauma exponentially, so these programs reinforce themselves and reinforce themselves and reinforce themselves. When we talk about the trauma from circumcision, it is installed all the way at the base of the subconscious, at the deepest levels. And during climax, what do you get? A complete opening of the deepest levels of the subconscious, so these programs can reinforce themselves. And so unfortunately, Sorry guys, pretty much every single one of you that's going to be watching this, you're going to have stuff you got to deal with, and it's not especially pleasant. Been there, done that. It's the whole reason I do all of this is because I understood I had things and software programs installed in me due to trauma, abuse, mistakes, everything else that needs to be corrected to be hatamim, to be the perfection, because I don't want those in there. That's why I'm doing all of this, is to talk about these things. And another big reason I talk about that is because I want the perfection. I want the perfection. I want to give my spouse that perfection. When I make love to my wife, I want it to be making love devoid of any other programs that are not me, that have installed themselves. I want them out. That's the whole point of this. And so we have, especially in the temporal lobe, which is long-term memory, language comprehension, identifying and naming objects, as well as emotional processing. That and the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for long-term decision-making planning. You take a look at guy sexually abuses a woman. That's prefrontal cortex. They can't take a look at the long-term consequences of what their short-term actions did. They're like, I'm caught up in this brainstem basal urge that my prefrontal cortex has been damaged and shut down. So it now doesn't look at these long-term consequences. It can't plan ahead to, oh my God, what am I actually doing? And so the pornography reinforces itself in this. And so we get into pedophilia. We actually have a base level of it being at circumcision trauma and pornography, because most of the pedophilia that's out there is in men. Why? Because this circumcision trauma cascades and it compounds itself generationally. So if your grandfather was circumcised, your dad was circumcised, and then you're circumcised, we're going to get this. Let's take a look at the genetics of this trauma. You see, these software programs that I talk about that install themselves are clever because they hijack your cleverness and your reasoning. Look at the amount of genes that are involved in trauma, PTSD. Traumatizing. It's circumcision for an infant boy is the most traumatizing thing that you can do. And they have, in our infinite wisdom, we have allowed these programs to come up with to soothe the baby. We're going to give them sugar water during circumcision in a bottle, which is the most addictive substance on the planet. So we are driving home every single one of these genes that you see related all over the place here that are cross-linked with all these different disorders of sleep disorder, alcohol use, mental depression, social phobia, social abuse, sexual disorders. But these all, the pornography falls into basically all of these. And these mood disorders, these genetics, this circumcision trauma compounds itself generationally as it goes along. So we talk about these software programs installing themselves and hijacking your actions when you're not even aware. We look at this at a grand scale of the way it plays out in rape, trauma, abuse, pedophilia, and sexual abuse to children. I know so many women sexually abused as a child that how could a person even logically, reasonably come to some capacity to do this to a child? It's because it's been disabled. It's genetically, emotionally, and it's all been disabled due to this trauma and this perversion of God's beautiful sexuality that's supposed to be hatamim, the perfection. Final slide, I'm just going to show us that we take a look at a healthy child's brain and a traumatized child's brain. Psychology Today, they actually took and they put an infant under an MRI and they performed circumcision using an obsidian blade because you can't have the metal in there. And they measured the changes in a child's brain and they concluded that it causes irreparable brain damage, strapping an infant boy down and cutting off the most sensitive part of this child's body. They say irreparable, I say BS, because you can always detox any trauma. Just this one is not a lot of fun because it is one of the first deepest programs that's installed when a child is strapped down in the most sensitive part of and pulled away from its mother. Child is strapped down, the most sensitive part of their body is cut off. So there's abandonment issues, there's sexual trauma, there's physical trauma, there's physical brain damage that happens to it. And you have literally hardwired this little boy's brain for pain, pleasure, reversal, symmetry, which is an ancient MK Ultra or ancient trauma-based mind control program to change the brain structure and the hardwiring inside of it by traumatizing an individual. So sorry guys, you're gonna hate me, but this is reality. If you want to experience intimacy with your partner on levels you have never dreamed, This is something you got to deal with. This has happened to you. Once again, if you are a regret parent and you did not know, do not hold this against yourself, because these software programs have hijacked humanity's collective consciousness and made traumatizing children and poisoning them the norm and the socially acceptable and not just acceptable, but preferred thing to do is to traumatize and poison your children, and that somehow makes you a good parent. But remember, do not hold this against yourself. If you did not know, it is not your fault. You're going to have to deal with that anger and everything, and that is how these software programs that install themselves work, is they compound trauma upon trauma upon trauma generationally, and they spread themselves. So don't hold it against yourself. Use your prayer, whatever it is you got to do, but come to terms with it and deal with it. Now, I know over the course of a couple of these slides and everything that we know, I just hammered home and blasted a bunch of things. Why? Because we can't just close our eyes and cover them up and say, I don't see it, it doesn't exist. It doesn't work that way. We can't do that anymore. We're at a period in humanity's spiritual and consciousness evolution that we have to shine lights into dark places. We have to clean it up so that we can say no more of this. Things may have happened. Guess what? God can do anything. Luke 1:37, through God all things are possible. All this trauma is possible to be healed. We could sit and we could wallow in how much of our life has been lost to it or anything else. That which happened to you doesn't define you. It only, you make that decision at any point saying, no more of this. I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to take care of it. God's got you. That's all you got to do. You don't need anything. While I talk about Virginity Oil and anything this I created to help with all this whole process, you don't need it. All you do, you got Jesus, that's all you need. Just right there. But I have made tools using God gifts to make this accelerate and happen faster for those who haven't evolved themselves spiritually enough that that's all that they have to do. So these are only tools, but I'm not required. I'm just a middleman. So I'm sorry for all the things that I put up. I apologize. I mean, it's not. I'm just addressing the things that need to be addressed, and I'm terribly sorry. But things are gonna get a lot more fun from here. They're gonna take a swing. We already went all the way down in the dark. It's time to swing to the light. Let's do this. And as promised, I said we would have an upswing. And so this next photo, we're going to be talking about the Basari Chad, or the one flesh. And as you can see, I painted it. I told us about how at the moment of climax, how your entire subconscious opens up. That's what happens. And the thing is, when your intimacy is centered around the Creator, it is the most beautiful thing ever. And that's what it was created to be. That's why it's called the sacral chakra, because it's sacred. That intimacy, and when you involve God in the middle of it and the two become one, when you reunite and go back to the source as a tamim, or the gamir, as the totally whole individual together again, this is where the magic happens. And this is the reason we shine the light in the dark place, to say, listen, I can't do that if I don't clean myself up. And this kind of picture is meant to represent what God had intended for us. This is what it's about when you are both connected with the Creator, when you are the one flesh and your minds have fully opened up to each other and you have made that commitment and that unconditional love to each other. And God displays himself through that creation and through this gift that was originally designed to be the most beautiful gift on the planet, arguably so, that when you experience this level of the Basari Chad and this divine union, this is what God had intended for a man and woman. And this is why they say you're supposed to wait until you're married to be the only thoughts at that point of climax are your partner and the other person that you have committed yourself to. That is what it's all about. This is what it's about, that there is no remnants of the other people that have left pieces of themselves inside you. They aren't there. There is only your other person, your partner, and yourself and God. There are only two people and one divinity involved in this equation, and nothing beyond that. They say the best kiss is the one that's been exchanged 1,000 times between the eyes before the lips ever meet. And so the Hebrew words for this unification during intercourse are the Basari Chad, which means the one flesh. And this is the example of what happens when two people are intimate and you're tying your souls together in that way, saying, I'm going to be with you. Be like, it is you and me and God, and that's it. And we've kissed 1,000 times before our lips ever touched. And that quantum entanglement that happens, that you can literally make love to your partner with your thoughts, and they can feel that, and you don't even need to touch them. That the touching is just a bonus on top of that. Is the point of the Basari Had, of that kind of entanglement, that all you got to do is think about the other person, and they hear you, and they feel all of your thoughts, and your thoughts are in complete alignment with God's laws and God's original intention in creation for you. We talked about this. Every person you're with sexually, you leave a piece of your soul inside of them, and they leave a piece inside of you. I talked about the quantum entanglement and how the subconscious opens up, and there's this huge exchange of energy in which you are entangled with the other person. Just like when you're in bed and you are wrapped around each other, you are entangled, and you can affect the other person from multiple universes away. That's the level of entanglement that happens in this Basari Had, where the two become one. Your thoughts are their thoughts, your mind is theirs, your body is theirs, and theirs is yours, and vice versa. And I know this is a fairly graphic picture here, but I wanted to really, in a fairly neutral way, express just what it means of that Basari Had, of where the two become one, of how sacred and intimate the act of intimacy actually is. And it's the only time where you can add more things and you can add 1 + 1 and get 1. That is what this Trinity is all about, and it's meant to be expressed in human creation through the gift of intimacy, where you both become one with the divine together. And that is Hatamim, which is the perfection as our Father in heaven is, where you are both connected directly to each other and straight to the source. This is the whole point of it's called the Hieros Gamos. It's the wedded garment of God wearing the white robes of the One. The Hieros Gamos refers to the risen Christos Sophia as the embodiment of the inner hierogamic union between the human being and the divine. And so, as above, so below, as it is in heaven, so it is on earth. You are what you're doing through this divine union, which is the ultimate goal, is the unification, in which there's the embodiment and there's the entanglement between the two people with the divine, and the divine masculine, divine feminine, the Yeshua, Christos, Sophia. When you get those embodied together, that is what we're talking about. That's basically like the Joseph and the Mary, if you will. When the two halves of the brain, the masculine and the feminine, are united in that corpus callosum, which is the Styx River, which is the little basket or the river that little ark, that little basket Moses was sent down, because Moshe means a gift. And it has to do with the ark protein that's received in the Aquarius reed proteins, and that is what this is all about, of the consummation of the as above, so below, in which the divine Christ represented in each of us. As Jesus said, that which I can do, you can do, and more. It was the whole point of Jesus' teachings to say, you are divinity. Act like it. That is the point. And so basically, when we look at this intimacy in the Hieros Gamos, it has to do with a divine union, not just between two people, but with the two Christ embodiments of the masculine version of the Christ body and the feminine version of the Christ body coming together between two people as one, where you are perfectly embodying both sides of the Creator into one, that Basari Had, into this Hieros Gamos. And Basari Had means the one flesh, which is the Ihad. The one and the thousand are all embodied within the one. That's the point of what human sexuality is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be barbaric. It's not supposed to be with a computer screen. It's not supposed to be between more than two people and God. It is you, your partner, both of you in perfection. Hatamim, the perfection, at one with your Father in heaven. That is what it's supposed to be about. And so this holy grail, it's the coupling, the genetic equal of the monad and its counterpart to embody this sacred marriage of the Christic equals, or the Christos, as they call it, or the Christ, to merge into one spiritual body that holds the Spirit of Christ. That is the point of it, that all of us are made in God's image, tselem, or image of God. And we, in our polarity, we have to embody different polarities. We both are masculine and feminine within us, but we are given a physical body that needs the polarity. And that polarity, especially in union with God, when we bring them together and we have the resolution of opposites and we experience the Creator, because we have to be able to fully entangle with our partner to experience everything our partner does. The man has to basically experience what it's like to have the feminine version of this intimacy, of having somebody else that deep embodied within you, and the opposite of the women having to basically experience what it's like to be the rod instead of the staff, and have that kind of a merger and feel every single thing your partner does physically, emotionally, and spiritually, to where you can restore this liberation and this ascension of the planet, going back to what God's creation of what sexuality and this sacredness of it is supposed to be. As above and so below, that which is unleashed upon earth is also unleashed in the heavens. Human intimacy was designed to mirror the sun and the moon themselves, joining into a union on earth. You're the entirety of the cosmos itself, right here on earth. That is the magic that is supposed to be embodied when the man and a woman come together in this sacred union. That is the level of divinity where the very sun and the moon itself join together, and the entire cosmos sings its praises through you. It's sacred, sacred chakra, the divine union, not just having sex. No, that's not what it is. This divine, this divinity within you, that you are the entire heavens expressed as dirt, given life and breath, coming together, into which all of the cosmos and every planet in the solar system that's mirrored in you comes together here on earth. That is what a divine union is supposed to, and that is what human intimacy is supposed to be about. It's the electric, the magnetic, the up and down, the left and right, or the left and right, the in and out, the masculine and the feminine, all of it, the whole rainbow looped back upon itself into infinity, so you can experience, so you can come together with God and the very source of all creation itself. That is the magic of the intimacy that God designed us to experience. And unfortunately, these rogue programs and softwares, we'll call it sin, mistakes, whatever you want to, whatever and however you want to put it, all of that gets in the way. And that is the point of this entire Virginity Oil and this whole becoming the virgin consciousness in which the Creator can come give birth to in your life. It can be birthed in your entire life, of basically how you bring true Jesus to the world, is the purification of oneself and reuniting with the other half of yourself in ha-tamim, of the perfection. That's what it is. And the Holy Grail, the cup of immortality, is the divine union. And it's expressed in so many ways throughout the universe and throughout the cosmos, but none of them are greater than a man and woman in perfection coming together in ha-tamim. That is the Holy Grail of all immortality, in which you and the Creator and your partner are one, in which your other half highlights everything great about you and magnifies it, and highlights everything not so great about you and magnifies it, so that you two together can come together and transmute all of it to ha-tamim, or the perfection, and you can be it and you can embody it, and you and your spouse can be the sun and the moon uniting here on earth in all of God's glory and all of God's perfection in Ha Tamim. That's what this is all about. And so let's have a little conversation about virginity oil, what it was created for, how it works, what's in it, and why you would want to use it and how to use it, and just the magic of being able to use God's tools that He's given us to restore ourselves to that perfection and to reflect His glory. Virginity oil is what I call the solution. It was designed to gently detox any trauma or abuse bestowed upon you or passed genetically from your ancestors, as well as to gently break any ties to previous sexual partners and literally basically erase the act of being sexually entangled with another person across all of time and space, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. It was designed to, we'll talk about some of the ingredients and how it was put together to do what it's going to do. But it basically, anything that's been quantumly entangled can be quantumly detangled. If it's not in your mind, it's not in reality. You can't have a divine union with your partner if someone else still lives where your partner is supposed to be. That's the point of this. It is to gently, because listen, I've made mistakes in my past and I don't blame the other person for that. And we talked about circumcision, trauma, and pornography. And if you've been abused, especially women, if you've been abused, that which is broken in the masculine is reflected in the feminine. So it had nothing to do with you and you did nothing wrong. It has to do with the other person is broken, they were broken, they were damaged, and they have rogue programs installed in themselves that they weren't even acting on their own accord. And so it helps you understand that the trauma that happened to you and the trauma that somebody else traumatized you with, it wasn't even them. It's not their fault. Forgive them. Let it go. And we can clean it from it, because nothing that happens to you can ever degrade the quality of your soul. And if you've made mistakes and you've been with other people, you can gently say, I love you, and we're just disconnecting from this sexual entanglement. And it doesn't have to be painful, and it doesn't have to be mean or spiteful or anything else. And you don't even have to blame anybody. Just say, hey, listen, these cords and these ties between us, we're just going to break them. And it's not a big deal. I still love you completely. But there's somebody else that needs to live in this space in my mind. It's not you in this lifetime. So that's what this whole virginity was designed to do. That any kind of trauma, abuse, mistakes, rogue programs, all of it, we're just going to erase it. Because just like you can erase a program off your computer, you can do the same thing out of your mind, your genetics, your emotions, your soul, your physical body. You just hit the delete button. And it doesn't have to be mean or any anger attached to it. If I delete a program off my computer doesn't care. It just said, fine, I'm putting a new program in. That's exactly how it's supposed to work. God's got your quantum computer that is expressed as your soul, your emotions, and your body. All you do is say, I'm installing different software and different programs inside of it. The old ones, you can't be mad about it. It's just software. Just get rid of it. That's it. Just let go of it. Put the new, better software. Install God in its place. It's that easy. So let's have a little chat about what's in it and how it works. One of the first ingredients that I put in it was called marjoram. Marjoram has historically been used to quelch the sexual urges and reroute the energy to other parts of the body instead. Monks and priests historically would use marjoram to help maintain their celibacy vows and keep sexual urges at bay. So the inclusion of marjoram in virginity oil is basically used to break the food source supply from the thoughts or actions that planted the seeds of entanglement in order to continue the propagation. So trying to basically purge any of these thoughts of sexual nature, of trauma, abuse, the other person, while you're still aroused in any way, makes it impossible to break the cords of the quantum entanglement at the spiritual and physical level. So what marjoram does is it basically just silences the little cords that it uses to grow roots in and connect into it. It just reroutes the sexual energy, not in an evil way or anything by saying sexuality is bad. It just says this sexual energy is going to be rerouted somewhere else into creativity or into something besides the physical act of having sex. That's it. Hyssop is the one that basically is another oil that's put into it to basically physically purify yourself, because hyssop is historically used for its purifying properties, especially on a physical level, because there is a direct DNA signal that gets embedded when a man's woman is deposited, or a man's semen is deposited into a woman. That DNA embeds itself into her. Hyssop, because of its purifying properties, what it does is helps to deconstruct the DNA and RNA that's been implanted through ejaculation into a woman during oral, vaginal, or anal sex, or even through just the thoughts alone of masturbation to another person. That will leave a spiritual signature and imprint of which will be built into the other person's DNA. So by breaking down that DNA that's inside you, we're breaking down the cords that physically bind you and allows then your mind and soul to be free of these physical genetic connections of the DNA being implanted in you, either implanted or a woman implanted into another person. We just erase it from the DNA. It's not a big deal. It's just like erasing a piece of physical software out of your computer. So that's what we're doing, and that's what hyssop is used for. Myrrh oil is included in it. It has the exceptional property of slowing down time and connecting the Adamah, which is the dust of the earth that we were given life and breath into, and thus this way our soul might be able to fully ground itself into our physical vessel. Trauma is when pieces of yourself get left behind and a piece of your soul is left in a different moment in time, as well as that piece of you that gets left into another person during voluntary or involuntary intercourse. Myrrh oil helps to, after this trauma and these cords and everything are broken and freed, all that energy is then redirected back into your present moment and your physical vessel after you've cut the cords of time between two people or two things, even computer screens or whatever else. When we cut those ties, we have to reroute that. So myrrh oil is good for grounding your soul back into your present moment and your physical body. Neroli is the oil of the purity and innocence and helps to tranquilize us enough to appreciate the beauty of life around us. Trauma separates us from the ability to feel God's love and the ability to stop and smell the flowers. Neroli vibrates between the second and fourth chakras, so the sacral, sacred, and the fourth, the heart, and it helps us to find the patience and love to forgive the other person no matter their trespasses, while forgiving ourselves for anything that we've done, for allowing pieces of ourself to be left behind in other people. Neroli is kind of the equivalent of a loving grandma that says, whatever happened, hey, come on down, let's sit and let's have some pie, and it doesn't matter. And so no matter what we've done, we can be free of the judgment because grandma says, you know what, it's all right. I got some apple pie for you, and we're going to put lots of whipped cream on it. And grandma doesn't care. That's kind of what neroli is like on an energetic sense, to just say, stop. Slow down, smell the flowers. Why are you busy thinking about this stuff that's not right now? Let it go. You got the flowers in front of you. Stop and smell them. Melissa oil is one of the most emotionally sensitive plants of all times. She allows us to feel the depths of our emotions, and when paired with neroli, allows us to appreciate the human experience of that which cannot be measured, but cannot be denied as real. You cannot measure the love between a mother and her child, but we can't deny it as real. Just because we can't measure it doesn't make it real. So she helps to soften even the hardest resentments of hate, judgment of ourselves and of others, and allows us to brings us the strength to feel the empathy for the other person and the pain of the disconnect of the trauma that was there that may have caused any of the circumstance of any sort of abuse that happened to you or any trespasses to your soul. And it allows us to feel the pain of separation from that who we might have loved at some point, of saying, listen, we might have been together and there was a love that brought us together, and it's okay to feel that, but that isn't right now. And so it softens those walls that allows you to feel these things so that you can have the courage to say, listen, I need to experience the entirety of these emotions. And the only way to do this, of the trauma perhaps that's happened to me, the way to let that go is to feel the empathy for how broken the other person was and how much their soul regrets whatever they may have done to you because of something that was broken in them that got reflected in you and caused the trauma to begin with. Goldenrod is included from the Greek word meaning to make whole. When the pieces of ourselves are lost due to this trauma, or when we personally left behind a piece of our soul during intercourse, there's got to be the intention of calling your soul back again. When we pair with the other oils in virginity, it helps to call back all these pieces that have been freed up once the cords of entanglement have been broken. Once we've detoxed the trauma, once we've let it go, once we've broken the cords, we've got to go across all of time and space and call it back to ourselves and ground it into ourselves. The myrrh grounds it in, but the goldenrod is the energy of saying, bring it all back, make me whole. And it can also bring about and highlight the areas of where cords are still tied to other places, so you can say, no, it is time to, I've identified the cord to break it, and I'm calling myself back, and I'm finding that there's a cord that needs to be cut to bring myself back to the present moment. And that's what the goldenrod is in this blend for. Orchid oil is included to help us really reach the deepest and most sensitive parts of our subconscious and have that courage to be sensitive enough to feel the delicate touch in an intimate way. You know, through trauma, if you've been abused, there'll be these emotional walls thrown up in your subconscious that you don't want to be touched. There's a block. There's these walls put up to the sensation of that delicate intimacy. And so these soft emotions and these soft feelings have to be met with the ability to have the physical sensitivity to feel this at the deepest levels. I mean, the deepest levels are manageable even by the lightest touch you can think of when your partner or spouse comes with that super light, delicate touch that's super intimate. If you don't have the subconscious capacity to process that because you have walls up, you'll never feel the physical sensation. And that's what this whole divine union is about, is sensitizing yourself enough to the other person, free of trauma or walls, that every touch is electric, no matter how light it might be. It light as soft as just one finger rubbing you lights up your whole body. And that's what the orchid oil is included for. Geranium oil is kind of what we call the oil of dissonance and change. In order to heal and integrate the pieces of your missing soul, a certain level of desire to embrace the dissonance that's required to move and change from one current emotional state to another must be present. Objects at rest and emotions at rest tend to stay at rest unless spurred by either an internal or external force to make that change. We've included just a little bit of geranium in there to create that internal dissonance that creates the desire for the change. The dissonance kind of helps shake and break these walls, saying, okay, these are here, but I don't want them there anymore. I've got to break them down. Walls of Jericho, let's blast these little trumpets. So geranium's a bit of a trumpet, that it causes this dissonance and this uncomfortableness so that you seek resolution and you seek change to move away from whatever walls were there. They break down and you move into this new emotional and spiritual and physical state that you can then embrace. Also included in there is we have the white rose, which is the archetypal representation of the Sophia or the Mary Magdalene, or the feminine version of the Christ consciousness in perfection, purity, and innocence. It's the perfect symbolism of, even amongst the thorns, that's where the beauty lies. She's a wonderful representation of how the feminine, the emotions of the waters can reshape entire coastlines without once raising her voice. And we can always remember of how the moon always has a pull on us, even when we can't see her. So this is the perfect embodiment of the divine feminine, of how she can move. The divine feminine, the moon, can move trillions of gallons of water, untold number of feet, twice a day, every day, move all that water back and forth. But the moon never raises her voice, not once. And how it has this pull on us, that these emotions can move us and change us and shape us. Like when you get the emotions of inspiration, of how it can move you, but the inspiration she never raises her voice. And that is what this divine feminine is all about, of being able to move the oceans and reshape shorelines, even if you can't see her. And finally, I've included dragon's blood, because dragon's blood is a powerful magnifier of the intentions and the other abilities of plants. Basically, think of it as take the whole equation of virginity oil, put it in parentheses. Dragon's blood oil adds a little squared sign to the whole equation. So it's a magnifier of everything, and it has arguably the highest antioxidant capacities of any resin or oil on the planet. The plant itself can also withstand extreme droughts or times without emotions without succumbing to the lack of water or emotions, and helps one to embrace the periods in which our emotions were disabled due to soul loss. So it helps us say, hey, look, let's embrace those periods of time when I wasn't in touch with all of my emotions because they were disabled due to trauma or regret or shame or whatever else it was. It says, listen, that's fine. There were times of droughts. I mean, Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness, in the desert, which that's a whole different conversation, but because that was an astrological period as well. But the thing is, that's the point of why the dragon's blood is in there, to take all the rest of what was before it, and we're just going to magnify it. And this is basically the blend of what's in Virginity Oil, why it's all in there, and what it can do for you. So how do you use Virginity Oil? Well, Virginity Oil can be used alone or with your significant other. For those that are going to use it with your significant other, you're going to put some on your hand, and you're going to apply it to each other's sacred regions while looking each other in the eyes. If you want to have a divine union, it's right in the eyes. The eyes are the window to the soul, so look at each other when you do it. You're entangling with that other person. You're touching that other person already in a sacred way. Add the looking into each other's eyes, because it's no shame. You two, if you're going to be together, if you want to experience that magic together, you got to look at each other. You can't be ashamed of what's in the other person, internally or externally. It doesn't matter. That's the whole point of look each other in the eyes while you do it twice a day and apply it to each other. And here's the good part too. It's best done twice a day with a minimum, for those getting started, go a minimum of 3 days before being intimate again. Why? Because this will allow the old software enough time to die. So it takes time to uninstall programs. So we are going through the act of uninstalling old programs and, quantum detangling from any other people, and we're silencing anything that's in the mind or these locations where trauma is or another person lives. This will take time to happen. Do not be surprised as well. This I cannot emphasize enough. Do not be surprised if people you were previously with suddenly appear in your reality again for those ties to be lovingly broken. Dude, the stories I have heard are out of this world, so don't be surprised. And those that have the mega cojones and the mega stones, you can go 40 days doing this twice a day before reuniting with your loved one. I can tell you that this very rapidly, after just a short amount of time, the strength of the urges goes up exponentially every single day. And the 40 days, anybody who has the ability to do this, I have not done it yet. It will be a struggle and a trial, because this turns on your desire for this other person that you put this on. It turns that desire on so strongly that when you're intimate again, it may not be the longest session that anyone has ever found, because it literally restores the virginity, especially in the masculine. It restores that having never done it before. Don't be surprised. So just fair warning for you guys. For those of you who do not have a significant other, this is not a bad thing. This is not a problem. For those of you who just want to clean themselves up and begin that process, apply it to your sacred regions at least twice per day and reform from any form of release or pleasuring oneself for at least 30 days. For those of you who are really serious, you can go 40 days twice a day doing it and refraining from any kind of release until whatever you're doing, whatever it is you feel called to do. It's not my business. Now, also, those who are single who are looking to attract the perfect mate, Jim Rohn, great network marketer, says you attract everything you do. You attract everyone and everything you do by who you are. In physics, this is called sympathetic vibratory resonance. Many of you have seen the gift that your vibe attracts your tribes, your frequency attracts whatever. More simply put, like attracts like. If you have a bunch of trauma installed in your brain, you are going to attract a partner that has a bunch of trauma in their brain. This doesn't mean this other person is a bad person. This is saying if you want to attract the perfect mate, you want to first become the perfect mate. And that is what will attract that situation. God works miracles. So when you bring yourself to a certain frequency, this sympathetic vibratory resonance, if I have a room full of tuning forks, all different tuning forks, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the different octaves, if I go in and I tap a middle C tuning fork, all of the tuning forks in that room that are tuned to C will start vibrating along with it, even though they were never hit. This is called sympathetic vibratory resonance, or as Jim Rohn says, you attract everyone and everything that you do by who you are. So when you clean yourself up, when you change who you are, you attract new people that are going to be more fitted to the new you, that will be a better partner, unless you're willing to go through the work with the other person. Now, granted, many times this is a one-sided thing where only one person is willing to put in the work and the other party is just kind of in it to win it real quick. So just keep that in mind. If you do all this personal work yourself, you're going to attract new people and situations. Last but not least, you can go pick some of this up at iam137.com under the shop section. We have a number of fun things there, and we're going to be developing lots more. I'm going to be getting my blog up and rolling and getting a lot more fun videos and PowerPoint presentations and everything. But if you enjoyed this and if you want to get some for yourself, the box is pure magic. I put a lot of beauty into this thing. So when you get it, it's going to be very impressive. Also, all of everything that I do through my ministries, all of the proceeds get donated to charity, to feeding us. I'm up to about 300 kids a month that 300 kids or families or people that get fed every month that I personally feed through myself, and then through the just personal contributions from my income, and then any income that comes from the ministries as well. Is also all the proceeds is I'm going to try and just get this as much as possible to I work for God in this aspect, that I'm just a middleman. I'd love to say I came up with this, but God is the one that put all this on my heart and did all of it. I'm just kind of the guy in between, saying I will happily do as you say, and then I will take, it's the whole Melchizedek of donate that 10% of the conscious mind. So I'm taking as much of my conscious mind as possible, saying I'm going to give it to God, and God says you get the other 90% of your mind back then because you're working for me. So that is the whole point of this, of any sales or proceeds or whatever else. All of it gets given away to either pay the employee right now that basically handles all of my shipping and everything else, and then all the other leftovers all just gets donated to charity, because that is the whole point of that, and that's basically what Jesus would do, is say, and that's what the whole point of the 10% in the Melchizedek is, of saying, how can you take that 10% of your conscious mind and give it to God, and in doing so, you get the other 90% back.